and welcome to From Our Perspective, Two Therapist Moms and a Mic. I'm Claudia Glassman,
And I'm Katie Truax.
and today we're diving into blended families. Yes.
Yeah. What a
So,
big, we actually had a special request to talk about this one, which is so fun.
yeah, it was a little while ago, but
Mhm.
we're getting to it. We're getting to it. So, I know, Katie, you share a different perspective because you do have a blended family.
I do. I do. Well, and I even wonder, like, should we start by like defining a blended family? Like, what
Yeah,
is a family?
let's do it.
How do we know if one is part of a blended family? Because families look like all different types of things now. What makes it blended?
Yeah. So, I've always kind of defined it as like your like step families, right? So two different families that had a separate unit at one point kind of coming together, right? So sometimes that's in second marriages, sometimes that's, after the passing of a parent and a remarriage, or even not even a marriage necessarily, but even just a bringing another partner into your life, right? And potentially more children if they've got kids, and how do we piece that all together?
And so, do both sides have to have children prior to the formation of the new family unit for it to be considered a blended family, or just one side?
I think just one side.
Okay.
Because I think no matter what, and you can, speak to this a little bit personally, but whether or not you're bringing your own children or have no children and are entering a relationship with someone who does, like that step parent role is not clearly defined and not a path that's like mapped out, right? There's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of um, figuring out how to fit, even if you don't have your own children, right? Like just how to fit into this other family. And I think, um, and with the families I work with, like that's really hard to know where those boundaries are, where the lines are, like what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And fitting into like a family culture that may already exist.
Oh my gosh, I know. And I sometimes those questions are never answered, you know? I mean, and who knows, maybe that could be relieving to hear for some people, but I mean, and so my experience is that I am a stepmom. I am married to a man who has a stepmom and a stepdad, and I have a stepmom and a stepdad myself.
Yeah.
So we joke because we say that, well, and my stepson's biological mother remarried too. So he has a stepdad as well. So Ethan, I think, has like eight
Mhm.
grandmothers or something like, like yeah,
Yeah.
like two, like each of us, right? Because his stepdad has a blended family too. So every single one of his four parents, including myself, my husband, his biological mother, and her husband, we're all from blended families ourselves. And so we each have a biological mother and stepfather, or excuse me, stepmother. And so Ethan now has eight grandmothers.
Yes, because he's got the steps and the biological ones.
Uh huh. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that's a lot. So, yes. And I think as we kind of maybe explore this, like exploring it from different angles, right? Exploring it from what it's like as an adult to enter, right? To be in a relationship with someone who has children, or bringing your family, yourself and your children into a relationship with someone else and their children, but also from the child's perspective, right? Because um, you know,
This
sometimes we
could
forget how
basically be
kids experience.
therapy session today. Is that okay?
If what?
This could just basically be like my therapy session. Is that
Oh, let's
okay?
do it. Yeah. Were you ready for that when we
No,
threw this topic out there?
no.
And I think I know that you have a very close relationship with your stepmother.
Mhm. She's amazing.
So also kind of dispelling this idea that, um, you know, this like evil step parent that comes in. And I know you jokingly like
I do.
refer to her that
So,
way, but it's with
yeah,
love. It's not
it-
because you have a bad relationship with her.
I
Right.
think I think she actually coined that nickname herself. She started calling herself my wicked mommy because when I was maybe 9 or 10, she and my so I grew up in North Carolina with my biological mother and my stepdad, and then she and my biological father lived in New Jersey, and they would come down around my birthday, which is in February every year to visit. And he liked to drive through the night. So they would get there at like the wee hours of the morning. And one time, she's just so fun and cool. She like went outside my window and like found these little pebbles and like just gently tossed these little pebbles at my window. And she would say, "Your wicked mommy's here."
Creepy.
And it was like so laughable and it was so fun. And she just always had, so she still does have such a way to make everything just super fun. But
Wow.
yeah, so yeah, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? So okay, where should we start? Because we could go in any direction. You tell me.
Yeah, it's messy. I don't know. Let's let's talk about, so I think you made a good point, right? That we don't have answers, right? Because the
Mhm.
reality is there's so many dynamics and factors at play that there is no like this is the one thing that will work for everyone, right? Because you are having to really, and this is where like therapy around that's helpful to kind of really dive in each family's dynamics, right? And then how to kind of melt those together. But I do think that maybe there's some things that may just require like attention or awareness, right? Like I kind of alluded this earlier, like that relationship as a stepmom. Like I think we can agree that you can't just come in and run it like it's you know what I mean? Like take over, like you are the parent, what you say goes, because you do have to factor in, two other parents for this child. And so I think there are certain, you know, pitfalls that you might want to avoid that are
Mhm.
maybe a little bit more universal. Um,
Well, and maybe a broad way to kind of capture all that, encompass and capture. No, that's not a word. I made that up.
we
Be
like
just
made up words. It's okay.
yeah, we do. Like assumptions in general, right? Maybe
Yeah.
that's try not to make assumptions. I think that that is maybe an overarching principle that could be really key, right? Because, I know in my growing up, my relationship with my step parents was very different from Ethan's relationship with me and my relationship with him. And some of that was there's lots of reasons for that, right? But some of it was bittersweet. There were some good aspects where we did things I think a little bit better maybe, and then there's some not so good aspects where there grief there for me where I had wished things could be different in a way that they just weren't going to be because of the rest of the family system and his unique personality and my unique personality, right? So and like what you said a minute ago, can't come in, no step parent really, whether it's a mother or a stepfather, right? And just assume that they can start making a lot of change, right? But so there's so much, right? There's everything from what is the role of the step parent, um how do you interact with the child, how do you interact with, I've even seen clients in my office questioning how they interact with each other when the child's around,
Yeah.
right? um what happens with biological children versus stepchildren, um even things around what do you call each other, right?
Yeah.
So many opportunities for families to kind of create their own stories, but um maybe one of the best ways is just for families to be having conversations about it, right? Like you said, like whether it's in therapy or if families tend to be particularly skillful with communication on their own outside of therapy, but conversations both with the kiddos, conversations between the two spouses around, how do we want this to look?
Yeah.
Who, what, and when, and so forth and so on.
Yeah. And I think it's also, I have interacted with a lot of people that, entered kind of this step family world when the kids were younger. And I know for Ethan wasn't that old either. Like he wasn't a
Yeah.
teenager, like he was a younger kid.
Yeah, he was 8 when I'm trying to think if he was 8 when we started dating or 8 when we really started having him join us. We waited about a year from the time we started dating to the time when we would really bring him around.
Yeah.
And I think that's is my opinion, but I think that's a pretty good policy, for the parents to be sure that it's going to be, likely to be a longer term relationship before introducing it to children. That's maybe a different topic for a different day, but maybe the topic of dating, right? As a parent, how do you date as a parent? I don't know. There's right or wrongs there either, but often, I see people rush so fast into things, and we all love and want to partner, but that's one thing. We did a lot of things probably wrong, but it's one thing I look back on and feel really good about the way we did it was waiting a long time, not a long time, a year, a solid year before really kind of showing Ethan that we were a couple and that we were dating.
Yeah.
So I don't remember if that was 8 or if it was 8 when we actually started, when we started dating, but 9 when we really introduced him to the concept of us dating. I want to say it was the latter. So either way, yeah, pretty young, under 10, and he really was confused by it, right? He was really
Yeah.
confused about what was going on. And I think that was largely in part to largely due to a lack of communication, probably among his biological parents with him around everything related to their divorce, their marriage, what marriage looked like, all the factors. And, I have an amazing husband, but really like communication was not one of his strong suits prior to
Yeah.
really being a therapist. Now he's gotten a lot
Well,
better.
and I think it's hard because, when you're going through that process as the adult, right? You're struggling with your own, feelings about a relationship ending. Maybe there's anger, frustration, like all the things, right, that go into the end of a relationship. And then you have this little person you have to face, and you don't want to unload, right? And totally bash the other parent. So
Mhm.
you may just sit quiet because it's either you're going to unload and bash the other parent or you say nothing. And I think sometimes we forget to come back and revisit at another time, but I do feel for parents who have to kind of try to explain the adult stuff to their children, especially when maybe it's things you don't want your child to know about, their other parent. Like it's not helpful for an 8-year-old to hear about every affair that was had in the marriage, right? So how do you put it, how do you explain it, right, to kids? And I think
Mhm.
that's really hard, you know?
I agree. And that's something that and I'm sure you do too, right? End up coaching parents around so frequently in my office is how to put things in, kid friendly language and how to introduce things at an age appropriate, way and level to them.
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
yeah.
We and to your point, right, the revisiting of it, and I think that that's so key. And I remember having those conversations and having and hearing things like we've talked about this, from my husband, or I told him, right, and I'm like, well, clearly we need to explain it again, right?
Yeah.
And I think too that maybe a good parenting nugget to remember, whether it's regardless of your family structure, right? But this concept of reminding, revisiting the important concepts and making sure that as kids age, we are addressing it in an age appropriate way, because that's different, right? What you're going to tell a 2-year-old is different from what you're going to tell a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old and a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old and a 25-year-old, right?
Right.
And our kids never stop being our kids no matter how old they get. And so yeah, so communicating a lot, and communicating, like I remember I felt satisfied when it was kind of like, well, okay, we know, all right,
Yeah, yeah.
awesome, my job is done here, right? Like whatever it was, whether it was we were talking about love, or we were talking about boundaries, or we were talking about discipline, or family rules, or you know back to school, like we talked about last time, right? Whatever the topic was, if the family response was, we know, right? Like,
Talked about it enough. We get it. Yeah, but I think that's a good point, because developmentally, right, their understanding, or even the questions that they have about whether it's the remarriage, whether it's about their parents' divorce, or even the passing of a parent, right? Like what you tell a 2-year-old about how someone passed is different,
sure.
as they age. But to leave that conversation open, because I don't think it's a one and done, like, hey, listen, we're getting divorced, I'm getting remarried, the end of both conversations, right? It's not the end. I also have noticed a theme, and I would say this is true for divorced families or those that are getting remarried. I think it's true on both ends, especially if you split custody and there's a lot of parents involved. Is there is some letting go of control and the way you would do things, right? Because the reality is your stepchild or your child that has to fluctuate between different households, right? And those households are ever changing based on who's coming in and out of it, right? Because if you have another child or you get remarried or whatnot, right? It's ever evolving. And the reality is you can't control what's happening in that other household. So there has to be some level of, this is how we would ideally do it in our household and raise our stepchild, our son, whatever. And then the reality is they go to this other place and they're doing it their way with their image, right? You always have to remember, like, these people are divorced, right? So of course they're not on the same page in a lot of areas, parenting probably included, right? And so there's a lot of having to release maybe the ideal life you wanted to build, maybe your idea of what you would want for your child at all times is going to have to be like, well, 50% of the time they get that from me and the rest they don't. But I think that's really hard. That's really hard to do.
It's so hard. It's so hard. Yeah. I mean, even as a step parent, right? I struggled with that for sure. And thank God, like I am hopeful, knock on wood, I won't have to experience that as a biological parent, right? But as a step parent, I remember really struggling with that concept of starting a path, right? Again, whether it was a path for studying, or mental or emotional or physical wellness, or just routine, right? And then, or even very rarely, thank God, I got so lucky with my boy, but discipline, right? And then the way our family was structured is we had 50-50 custody, and it was half a week. So instead of like 1 week on it, 1 week off, we had Ethan for half of every week. So 3.5 days, and then he's gone, right? And then back again. And so we lacked continuity, right? And I think that that's one of the hardest things of a blended family, is the lack of continuity, whether it's because the child goes back and forth to different households, like you said, we're adding, we're subtracting people from their lives, right? Parents are dating, partners are coming and going, like you said, children are being added, right? Sometimes people move, right? You got twice the opportunity for things like moves or job changes or school changes. And or even I've seen in my clinical practice where one parent all of a sudden denies the child therapy, or another sort of a doctor, what seems like an elective sort of treatment, right? whether it's like a speech therapy or physical therapy or occupational therapy or mental health counseling or psychiatric care, where one parent really wants it and the other says no, or maybe said yes at one point and then stops saying yes. And
Right.
so the child kind of lacks that continuity. And I mean, then you have the continuity, within each home, like you said, of the values and the rules and the discipline and what's expected of them in each household. Um, was different, from house to
Right.
house.
Yeah.
They're different, right? Um, yeah, so much change, which I think can really help build resiliency in children if they're wrapped up well enough, right? But if not, it can feel like maybe they get lost in the shuffle.
Right. Yeah, I don't think all of those things in themselves, they may pose a challenge in the moment, but I do think there's growth to be had from having to, switch gears, accommodates. I mean, my kids go to school. There's rules there that they don't have at home, and they can fluctuate between different systems, right?
Mhm.
I do think is the support there, right? Do they feel like they matter? Do they feel like they have a voice? Do they have a space to express their thoughts and feelings about what's going on? Even if it doesn't change anything, just to say this is hard for me or I don't like this or whatnot.
Yeah.
I think the discipline is a challenge. And I don't know if there's a gender difference in this. I have worked with a lot of step families. Um, And I guess maybe from your experience, like when Ethan was with you guys, how did you guys he didn't require a ton of disciplining, I know, so maybe this is a harder question, but like, was it Rob, who's his biological parent, that took over? Did you participate? How did you guys work that out? 'Cause I have my thoughts on
Mhm.
what I think is ideal, but again, varies by family, right?
Claudia, you're asking me to remember things.
Okay. I am.
That's not my strong suit, particularly challenging things. Like maybe I just like to lead those brain cells. Let me think. You know me to be a very opinionated human.
I do.
And add to that my degree, my master's degree, lends me particular training in things related to child development, emotional development, so forth and so on. And then a lot of postgraduate training in parenting and parent education, right? And things like play therapy or filial therapy for children. Like, I was probably the worst know it all as a stepmom there ever could be, right? But fortunately, I married a man who is kind of the yang to my yin or yin to my yang, depending, but where he's very mild mannered for the most part. He does have his moments and his sides, but tends to be pretty laid back and easygoing and open minded. And I think one of the things that I appreciate most about my husband was that he did come to the table with some conceptions, obviously, but was open always to hearing, and particularly, if I could bring some reasoning for why to the table,
Yes.
receiving new information and new ideas from me and kind of taking them on.
But he received the information from you and then he executed that. It wasn't you
Uh-huh.
disciplining Ethan, it was you giving feedback on how you,
Yeah.
which makes sense to me, right? Because
Mhm.
you and Rob had a partnership. And so that partnership extends, beyond just the two of you, also to your children and your stepchildren, right? Or your bonus child or whatever you refer to them as, right? So I think that's fair. But then the actual like follow through of it sounds like, from what you remember, came from Rob.
Yeah, and I think that I remember early on we negotiated that dynamic, which is a little tangent, but I think it's related, with our families of origin as well. And
Yeah.
this I've also seen couples struggle with in my office, is this idea of when we need to have kind of crucial conversations, right? Who is the one initiating those? And the decision that we came to in our family was that, and there's well, I'm thinking faster than I can speak. The decision we came to in our family was that the person who is biologically related would, you know, for the most part, be the one to be the deliverer of the message, right?
Yes.
And that decisions would be made between Rob and I as husband and wife, and then the biological relative would have the communication, whether it was with the child, with, you know, siblings, with parents, right?
Mhm.
And that's one way I've seen families do it. I've also seen families decide that the person who has the issue, quote unquote, right, is the one to bring that to the table, kind of speaking for him or herself. And so I don't know again if there's a right or wrong way, but I do think it's important for families to have a system and a decision, right?
Yeah.
And I think with older kids, back to the communication, yes, with younger kids, probably this should start between the husband and wife. And of course, the husband and wife should always agree on this. However, I think it's okay to bring the children in, right? Too, like, and ask them.
Mhm.
Um, and it's interesting because over the years, Ethan has developed a relationship with me where he comes to me with a bunch of deep things, um,
Yeah.
and he come not so much with other stuff. I'm kind of like the I can maybe think of, I don't know, maybe like 10 times over the past 16 years where he's come to me and it's been very heavy things that he brings to the table, right? And I'm the
Yeah.
person to come to with the heavy things. And we're not out playing putt putt together per se, but we do the heavy conversations in the kitchen
Yeah.
while I'm dinner.
Yeah.
Uh, so the conversations with, what is the step parent's role, what is the parent's role, who's going to be delivering the discipline, who's going to be delivering the structure. And then this is an interesting one too. When Rob and I got married, we moved into a house that I had owned previously, prior to us getting married. And so I lived there prior to Ethan coming in, Rob coming in. And I remember also kind of reserving some rights as the owner of the house that,
Mm. It's my
I,
house. Yeah.
this is my home, right? And this is how things are going to be done in my home. Um, and again, I didn't get much pushback, but that's another kind of dynamic that I've seen in some of my clients, the struggle of, okay, well, we're not only are we blending two families with different values and different rules and different expectations and different pasts and but we're also moving into a new space, or all of a sudden I have new people in my space, right?
Yeah.
And wow, how does that play into everything too?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I remember the roles are so interesting because, again, there's no right answer, and I will say that some of my thoughts are maybe a little skewed because obviously I see the step families where things are not working because they're coming to me for help. So I'm seeing a system that's struggling, not the ones that are, maneuvering and kind of keeping things going. But I remember, there's been a couple of families, and some of it might be location dependent and just like value dependent, where a woman remarries and brings her children into this new home, right? And she holds a very specific view of who should be in charge, right? Her husband should be in charge and he should be. And so now stepdad takes on the role of, I run this house, right? Because from their perspective, that fits into their view of how the world should be, right? The man is in charge, and and it works in their relationship, but now you're bringing in the kid, and the issue became adolescent stepchild, right? Having a lot of issues with the power plays that stepdad takes
Mm-hmm.
and working kind of through that, right? Because that relationship dynamic may have worked fine if they had their a child together, but it just didn't work for this kid who was new to this.
Right. Like,
So
are you to tell me what to do?
Right.
Right.
And with such authority, right? And then, you come in with like your own view of how children should be raised.
Yep.
Like I kind of, I don't have a step family, but I remember I was a really awesome parent before I had kids. I knew exactly what to do, Like I could rock
Oh,
it. And then I had kids. I'm like, well, half this crap doesn't work. Like, you know what I mean? Like I was just so much better before I actually had children. So I feel like if I would have entered a relationship with someone who had children, not having had my own to humble me into submission,
mm-hmm.
oh my God, what kind of stepmother would I have been? Because in my mind, I had expectations
Mm-hmm.
of how a child should behave. In my mind, I had a picture of what kind of parent I was. None of that turned out to be what I am, which is, makes me laugh. But like I kind of wonder like how many people go into that, right? And then you end up with this like 8-year-old kid and you're like, well, this is how I feel like kids should be raised. Their parents aren't doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think no matter what, even if that's not your stance, you've probably had to, and every other parent that's in a blended family has had to sit back and watch the biological parents make decisions about the child that maybe you would not choose for that child.
Mm-hmm.
But you're
Mm-hmm.
still living in this house with all the, with the outcome of that. And I think that's
Yeah.
really hard to navigate. But I do think the key is really whether, with your partner, obviously constant discussions on how to manage things. Um, a lot of patience. I think patience for the kids involved in the family, because I do see, and I think it's a little subtle, and I think it's a lot more subconscious, but I do see a lot of bumps when when the parent and step parent have their own child, because I think that becomes um like on some level I think that's hard for the stepchild, right, in that family. Even if you're doing it in the best way, I think you just have to understand that there's going to be feelings about it that are not right or wrong, that don't mean anyone did anything wrong. It's just it's weird, it's weird to have a sibling
Yeah.
whose parents aren't
Mm-hmm.
yours, and then they may be raised differently because the influences are different. And I do see that hiccup, and I think sometimes there's a delayed reaction. I know a lot of people that had that reaction came from their stepchildren in their later teens, early 20s, like almost like something about this like becoming an adult, and then I think you really start to conceptualize stuff.
Yeah.
Where I do know several people that kind of have that hiccup later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think it's a lot to navigate, because of course the kids have feelings about having another sibling in general, but now
Right.
having another sibling that's really part of that nuclear family, and you're just, you feel a little bit on the outside, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Okay, so follow-up question for you.
Yeah.
So one of the things you just said made me think about this concept of like loyalty or like allegiance or oh, what are some other words to describe what I'm trying to get to? But basically, where does your loyalty lie? Right. And this isn't unique to a step family per se, although I think it is amplified in the step family
Yeah.
system, right? Is the loyalty between parent and child,
Mm.
maybe that existed prior to the blending, or is the loyalty to the spouse?
In terms of for the partner who's the biological parent, who's loyal.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. Right.
That's I don't I know what
Or
you're saying. Yes, like I think people navigate that differently. I mean,
yeah.
I have heard adult clients say things in processing their lives of ex-parent chose relationships over me, right? Mom
Mm-hmm.
chose men over me, dad chose women over me, and I didn't matter. So
Yeah.
when I hear that from an adult who's struggling kind of processing that part of their childhood, it's like, well, if their, loyalty was with the guy they were with in that moment,
Mm-hmm.
But I can also understand from the partner's perspective of, but I want a spouse who supports me, who's loyal to me. But I
Mhm.
think that right there is the landmine of blended families.
Yes.
Because I think as the person marrying into this family, the step parent that comes in, I do feel like you just have to maybe accept that you may not in every moment be the one who has the loyalty,
Mhm.
because I think it fluctuates. I
Yeah.
don't, and I think it can, it can cause some challenges because I get it from both sides, but I think that's where the hurdles and the bumps are constantly being coming up. It's like, do I matter or does your kid matter more?
That's
And
right.
I don't want to be second all the time, but I also get you have a child. I
Mhm.
do think that's the thing people need to realize when they marry into this, that like
Mhm.
it's not going to be the same equal partnership that you would have
Right.
if you had created your own family from scratch. And I know you have Ellie with Rob, and then you had Ethan from, Rob's relationship before. I mean, maybe you can attest to that. The difference in your relationship,
Mhm.
even in your relationship, right? Where that loyalty lies when you're dealing with, Rob and Ellie
Mhm.
versus where it is when it's Rob and Ethan and Katie, right? Like
Mhm.
it probably, which is even more confusing to you, I'm sure, because it depends on which kid you're talking about as to, right? Like how it all plays out. But I'm right. I'm sure there's times where it felt to you as like, wait a minute, what's happening here? Right. I don't know. Crazy.
Interesting, because if I do reflect back, I remember, I don't know if this was undergrad or grad school, but I want to say, oh, I want to say it was my undergraduate class. God, probably was child development, and having these conversations and these explorations around, different values related to parenting. And I remember wrestling between the two concepts, right? Two models for family, kind of how to structure family value wise. And one was that the allegiance is between the husband and wife, that they came first, they grow love, and then out of their strong love for one another, they give birth to children. And then they, from a full cup, can pour love down. Sorry about that ding, into the children, right? This was like this
Right.
ideal utopian family structure, right?
That helps you not at all in this case.
Versus kind of where the alternative was the parent is primarily allegiant to the child, right? And the child comes first in all things. Once the child is born, that child comes first. And I remember having these conversations with my husband prior to getting married, and we were opposed. I was of the former and he was of the latter.
Mm.
And about that, I don't know how to make that stop.
I can't hear. It's not coming through on our end.
Okay, good.
We're not hearing the dinging.
I had some dings, guys. Um, and so we were on other opposite ends of the spectrum, where I wanted this utopian family system, right? And he had had an experience in his marriage prior where they both put the child first, right? The opposite system structure. And so we were coming together to revisit this and trying to decide these things about, okay, who disciplines, what are our values, how are we going to maintain continuity in our household on the days when, 3.5 days a week we have a child with us, and the other 3.5 days we do not. How do we maintain continuity in the way we demonstrate affection to one another, quality time with one another, chores, who is doing what right around the
Yeah.
house? And there was a lot of grief there for me, because at the end of the day, as a stepmom, right? And this is something I think not a lot of people talk about, but you have to sacrifice that dream, right? That
Yes.
ideal.
Yeah.
And that's not the only time we have to sacrifice dreams and ideals. Not to be a Debbie Downer, but life's freaking laden with that stuff, right?
Yeah, but
I
I
know.
think you're no, but I think you're right. Like an interesting point. it's not this smooth transition in. I think you have to be really aware that you don't get to create the exact family you had imagined,
Nope.
because it's not, that's you're taking on what's already there. And even this like idea of loyalty, like, is it to the partner, is it to the child? I mean, you think about these moments where there is a lot of conflict between potential step parent, right? Maybe partner and the child, and the kid's like, I hate this person, right?
Mhm.
What do you do then? We're talking, you're not even a blended family yet. You haven't even gotten that far,
Right.
right? But that parent does need to make a decision on like, what's my stance on this, right? When do I override my child's opinion, or when do I say, you know what, like, it's their life too, and I won't bring someone in that they can't stand,
Yeah.
which is, that's more, that's that's before you even got to this point. But I do think there's a grieving and there's a loss for that step parent of, I'm going to
Mhm.
have to bend a little to fit here,
Or a lot. Yeah.
or bite my tongue and not
Mhm.
always share my opinion, because that right now, right, it's this understanding, and you learn, I think, through messing up of like, where's the line in this family for me? Like, where
Mhm.
is, I don't want to say my place, but yeah, like, where's that boundary that when I cross is, it's no longer for me to have that say there, right? Because it's somebody
Mhm.
else's child. And you get into the dynamics with the other parents that, throws in an added wrench of,
Mm.
does this couple get along with the other step parent and
Right.
biological parent, right? I mean, there's a lot of a lot of personalities and people to navigate. So yeah,
So I feel like, again, to bring it full circle,
we have no answers. The
right?
end.
The
Just kidding.
wrap up, right? Because, uh,
Yeah.
but you said at the beginning, there's no right or wrong. And I don't know if there's any answers, right? There's still so many things in my own family where I had thought at some point we would answer some of these questions as, Ethan will be 24 in December, right?
Oh,
And a lot of these things that you're touching on and saying, okay, yes, so these are things that are out there to navigate. Did they ever get resolved? Right? I don't know. I don't
I think you
believe so.
move through them. I don't know if there's a resolution, but you make
Mhm.
your way through and you stumble past and you kind of
Yeah.
keep evolving, because there's no, every developmental stage changes something. The birth of a child changes, like, you're constantly, it's ever evolving. So I don't know if there's a like, we've got it, because the second you
Yeah.
do that, it's with parenting in general, the second you're like, I got it, you're like, oh, I don't have this. But I
Mhm.
think it's right, it's open conversation. Again, I work with a lot of people, and I know you do too. Sometimes it's just having a third party, and they're helping you navigate where you stand on things, and processing that
Yeah.
grief, right? Processing the change, processing the struggle. Um, I work a lot with kids, and I get to do that with them individually on helping them navigate change and manage, their own hopes and dreams that didn't come to fruition because they're now
Mhm.
in this new family, or, their parents aren't together anymore. And so I think it's, to some extent, reaching out for support to help guide through it. Um, but it's so different for every family. Like, I don't have an answer, right? Because every single client I've ever seen that's from a divorced family has a different family dynamic
Right.
and different needs and different
And
struggles. Yeah.
yeah, so many personalities. I mean, we haven't even touched on the impact of grandparents.
I mean, the eight
Right?
grandparents Ethan has, we don't, right? That's a whole nother.
Yeah, the culture, the culture of place, the culture of ethnicity, the culture of, the time, when we're talking about here. Um, and there's just so many things that are constantly changing. So I think that this episode could be bittersweet for somebody who was really hoping to get a lot of insight.
We
Right?
apologize. We do
Yeah,
apologize. But you're
but
not alone, right? I think that's,
that's right. And just to validate and to normalize that it's hard, right? And that there are no right answers. No family has it on lockdown. And, there are no two families that are the same. No two families navigate this perfect or navigate it the same. No family at all navigates it perfectly, right? We all mess up. We all look back and think, oh, well, if I knew then what I know now, right? I would do things differently. Or maybe, you know what, I did the freaking best I could and I'm so proud of myself, and it still ended up being a little bit of a mess.
Yeah.
Or a lot, right? But it's just one of the hardest things I think that we can go through in life, but obviously one of the most beautiful, right? Because it's all done because of love,
Right.
and because of love between um, two partners, and between those partners and children, and ideally between siblings, if that is a factor as well. And so we're doing it for good reason, but it's really messy, it's really hard and very complicated, and ever evolving, ever changing. But I think, what did we say? If we could do anything, we would encourage open communication, continued communication, revisiting things, talking to children in an age appropriate and open way, again and again and again, talking between partners about value systems, um, who does what, the structure of the family, what's expected of each partner when it comes to parenting, when it comes to household responsibilities, when it comes to dynamics like you brought up, like authority and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, did we have any other sage
I
advice?
think also, and you had kind of, hinted at this a little bit, but finding your way as a step parent to connect with that stepchild in a
Mm-hmm.
way that maybe is not the way you imagine traditional parenting, right? So like you had said, like Ethan comes to you for like deeper things. That's your space in his world, and that's okay. Everyone's got a different space, right? Your your stepmother found a way to connect with you, right? And in a way where you guys, you're clearly an adult and you're still close.
Yeah.
And so, I think thinking a little bit outside the box of how do I connect with this kid, right?
Mhm.
And it might not be the way you would connect with your own biological child. It might be a different flavor to it, but really kind of finding a way into their world and understanding that, like, sometimes you might get pushed aside, sometimes you're needed. I mean, I guess parenting is like that too, but I
Yeah.
think you just never know where you stand as a step parent. And so I think it's, again, it's about flexibility. It's about being able to ride the waves and not, you know build too much resentment, too much frustration when things are constantly changing and you don't have a lot of control over what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And everybody gets permission to cry.
The whole family, everyone can be in tears.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Well,
And
I think this, I mean, I do apologize. We don't have answers. I really wish sometimes, but I feel like we have this a lot. We don't have, there's no magic to what the work we do. I mean, we really dive deep with people. We dive into their lives. We navigate, we troubleshoot, we problem solve, we process, we work through, but it's not this is what you do and then you're done. Otherwise, like, we'd all be doing all the right things, right? So
perfect.
I know. Well, it was
Hey,
good seeing you, Katie, and thanks to everyone listening. And we will be back next week.
absolutely. And as always, you can find us on social media. Claudia's Mighty Oak Parenting, and I am Rob and Katie Truax, Truax. And if you see this posted and you want to suggest follow-up topics or conversations, we'd love to hear that. And we take your suggestions gladly.
Yes. All right. Bye bye.